The first time I met Prince Philip was at Balmoral Castle. It was my first year there. I was working in the kitchen. I was the only one there. And this old man came in tatty clothing, a real tatty sweater with all the elbows falling apart. And I thought it was the gardener. And he said, I'm looking for the head chef. I said, just a moment, I'll go and look for him for you. So I went off into the larder, found the chef. I said, Chef, the gardener's looking for you. He said, the gardener this time of night? Well, we walked back into the kitchen together. And the head chef said, good evening, Your Royal Highness. And I suddenly realised it was Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. After that, he came into the kitchen 4 or 5 times a week. He'd often come in and just discuss about the barbecues. He loved to cook. He loved to cook on the grill. Prince Harry called him the master of the barbecue, and he really was. He'd come into the kitchen after afternoon tea, and the chefs would be shouting all the way around, the Duke's down, the Duke's down, just getting ready to discuss with him what he wanted for dinner that night. It wasn't just Balmoral where he cooked on the grill. On the Royal Yacht Britannia too. Well, not actually on Britannia. When we were on the Western Isles cruise, we could be up at the Isle of Skye or somewhere like that, and he'd see a deserted beach somewhere, and he'd say, it was a beautiful day, and he'd say, let's do a barbecue. So we got a barbecue lunch. So they'd send a boat ashore and set up the barbecue, and he would go ahead and get the fire going, and then the rest of the family would go along later. He just loved cooking on the grill. He was always tickled by new gadgets. I remember somebody gave him a pepper mill with a flashlight on the end, and he could see where the pepper was going, this flashlight shining down onto his steaks when he was grilling. I think all of the chefs used to enjoy it when the Duke came into the kitchen to talk about a barbecue. He'd always been into the gardens that morning or something, and he knew what was ripe. He'd walked and he checked everything. Were there lots of strawberries that were ripening? Were the vegetables ripe? And he had these plums that grew at Balmoral that were just amazing, and often you'd see him just in the garden, just sort of stood there picking these gorgeous Victoria plums, and you had to stay on top of everything. When he came into the kitchen and said, what are we having tonight, and are there any strawberries in the garden? That was a loaded question. He knew that there were strawberries in the garden if he was saying that, and you better know as well, he didn't suffer fools gladly. He had a great sense of humour too. I remember Princess Diana sat in the kitchen, sat on top of the freezer, and she was just picking away at lychees, eating those, and she was chatting about the theatre and Phantom of the Opera. Suddenly the Duke walked in, and she turned and she said, oh, you've caught me. And he said, you're down here to discuss the barbecue tonight, are you? And she just looked horrified. She said, I wouldn't know where to start. Normally the Queen would be the one that chose the menus for the two of them for dinner. But I think he liked it when he got to choose the menus for his private dinner parties when he was with friends. He always went for sort of weird and crazy and different foods. I think just, a steak was boring. So he'd say, let's have jugged hare or snipe or teal or partridge, all of these different game from off the estate. He'd say, let's do a souffle for dessert. And you'd say, well, would you like chocolate or Grand Marnier, vanilla? And he'd say, let's do kipper. Okay. Even at breakfast, I think just eggs and bacon were boring. He loved it when you put smoked haddock kedgeree or deviled kidneys on the menu. I remember one time we were at Wood Farm, and he had noisettes of lamb, tiny little eyes of meat for dinner for him and his guests. And he came into the kitchen and he said, what have we got for dinner tonight? And I said, Your Royal Highness, it's the lamb, the noisettes of lamb. And I opened the fridge and he pulled them out. And he said, well, what about these? What are these? I said, oh, that's some leg of lamb steaks. That's for the staff. And he looked at the tiny little noisettes and the big leg of lamb steaks. And he said, well, we'll have those. So I had to thaw some chicken really quickly for the staff. Once at Sandringham, we had mango melba on the menu for royal dinner. And the Duke came into the kitchen, and I was just peeling and slicing the mangoes. And he just stood there and watched. He said, that's not the proper way to peel a mango. And then he came over and he said, give me a knife, give me a spoon. And he took the mango and cut around the edges and then scooped in with the spoon on both sides and opened it up. And then did the same the other side around the stone. And he was so excited. He was so proud that it had actually shown the chefs the proper way to do a mango. He was charming and elegant too. I remember the Gillies Ball at Balmoral Castle, and I got to dance with him. The dashing white sergeant, 2 sets of 3 going around in circles, Scottish dancing. And it was girl, boy, girl, girl, boy, girl. And I was the boy in the center of my group, and he was the boy in the center of his group. As we came face to face in the group, he just nodded his head and smiled. Happy memories. One of the things I loved about Prince Philip was his sense of humour too. He was cheeky, like Prince Harry said. I glanced across into the fruit cupboard one day at Balmoral Castle and I saw someone in there. I could just see their backs. And I shouted across through the window, "Hello, can I help you?" And then I realised it was the Duke. And he just stuck his head round. I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Your Royal Highness. I thought someone was stealing the fruit." And he just looked back, smiled and said, "Well, I am." One Christmas he came into the kitchen and I was getting the Christmas cakes ready for afternoon tea. He looked at the cake and I'd done 1990 big bold letters across the top. And in the bottom right corner I wrote tire. Naturally he said, what does tire mean? I said, "Oh, it was a good year." He was still laughing when he walked out the door. One of his favourite dishes was Crepes Islandaise. He attended a banquet in Iceland and he loved this dish so much he asked for the recipe. And then when he got it, he sent it down to the kitchens and he was so excited that he got this recipe for the royal chefs to prepare, and he used to request it for a lot of his dinner parties. It's basically just jam and cream just mixed together inside a pancake, but it's simple, it's plain, but he really enjoyed it. I'm going to show you how to make the dish. You start off with 2 large bowls. Into one you add the dry ingredients, the flour, the baking powder, the baking soda and the salt. You whisk everything together until everything's combined and there are no lumps. In the other large bowl, the wet ingredients, the eggs and then the vanilla. I like to use vanilla bean paste. Then the milk, and whisk that into the egg mix. Next, the melted butter. In the original recipe it says margarine, but I think the butter gives it a much better flavour. Then you add the wet ingredients into the dry ingredients and whisk together to make a delicious batter. You have to whisk it to make sure there are no lumps. Next, you need a hot soty pan on the stove. Add a little vegetable oil to stop any sticking. Then pour the batter into the centre of the pan and swirl and spread out the batter so that the crepes aren't too thick. Place the pan back on the stove and cook it until it's golden brown. Carefully turn the crepe over and cook on the other side. Slide it onto a plate and while you make more. You need to allow 2 per person. You leave the crepes to cool while you whip the cream. Then fold the now cold crepes into half and cut with a large round cutter. If you don't have one, that's okay, you can leave them whole. Open up the crepes. And next, spread with a little jam. I like to use plum jam. The Victoria plums in the Balmoral Gardens just made the best jam, and I know it's one of the Duke's favourites. Next, we top with the whipped cream. Don't put too much in there, we have to fold them over and we don't want it oozing out. Fold the lids on top, press down slightly, and then we just have to put them on the plate. A little sprinkle of powdered sugar. And these are ready to serve. Crepes Islandaise, a recipe from the Duke of Edinburgh. It wasn't just amazing foods that we served at the palace, but the wines were incredible too. Gorgeous wines, but Prince Philip wasn't really a wine drinker. He just liked a beer. He loved his IPAs and really enjoyed those, even at banquets. Rest in peace, Your Royal Highness. Thank you for the years of happy memories.